Hey folks, Mally Osiris here, and welcome back to Deconstructed. Today we're going to be deconstructing a little bit of Jordan Peterson and the moral argument for God. There's a lot of arguments for God, the ontological, teleological, cosmological arguments, but one real popular one right now is the moral argument for God. And it goes a little something like this. Basically, if God doesn't exist, then objective moral value can't exist. Well, objective moral value does exist, therefore God must exist. By objective moral value, I mean things like it is objectively wrong to rape and murder and so on and so forth. Now, of course, unbelievers do not believe that it is objectively wrong or right to do anything. Now, does that mean that we are totally okay with rape and murder and so on and so forth? Obviously not. So how we get there is different, and I'm going to demonstrate how it's a better moral system than the one found in religion. So evolution has instilled within us certain drives for self-preservation, and well-being is generally how it's put in the unbeliever community. That's how Matt Dillahunty puts it, and that's how a lot of us put it. This causes a bit of contention with religious folks, and we'll get to that. But well-being, what is it exactly? Well, it differs from species to species. Our species happens to be a collaborative species. We're more like ants than we are lions. We collaborate, we create colonies, like bees create colonies, and we depend on each other. We call that interdependence. So, for instance, a blacksmith makes a yoke for a farmer, and the farmer uses that oak, hitches it up to his oxen, and gathers wheat, and pays back the yoke maker with some wheat. And they've both benefited each other, so on and so forth. Humanity is also programmed to release oxytocin in the brain when we form meaningful relationships. So we're evolutionarily programmed to feel these lovely sensations of interconnectedness. This is what we're programmed to do. So it's a matter of self-preservation in the context of human society, where we're interdependent, co-reliant. And it's also a pleasure-seeking motivation, because oxytocin feels good. So this creates an ideal or a goal of collaborative well-being. And that is what we are programmed for. That makes behavior good or bad relative to the goal of collaborative well-being, which we're programmed for. It doesn't have to be objectively good or objectively bad. Matt Dillahunty's analogy is to a game of chess. So there's objectively good moves in chess given a specific context, which is you're trying to win the game. And there's objectively bad moves toward that end. Related to life, if chess is a game of life, there's objectively good moves and there's objectively bad moves if our goal is collaborative, interdependence, cooperativity, and so on. So the should in this, as in we should behave well and we should not behave poorly, comes from the fact that we have a goal that we're working toward. And here Jordan Peterson says something that I agree with fully.
Behavioral truth isn't the same as objective truth. What you should do isn't the same as what is. As far as I can tell, people debate that, but I think the reason that that has to be the case is because, think about it this way. You're standing in front of a field, and you can see the field, but the field doesn't tell you how to walk through it. There's an infinite number of ways you could walk through it. And so you can't extract out an inviolable guide to how you should act from the array of facts that are in front of you, because there's just too many facts. And they don't have directionality. But you need to know. You need to know how not to suffer, and you need to know what your aim is. And so you have to overlay that objective reality with some interpretive structure. And it's the nature of that interpretive structure that we're going to be aiming at hard. I've given you some hints about it already. We've extracted it in part from observations of our own behavior and other people's behavior. And we've extracted it in part by the nature of our embodiment that's been shaped over hundreds of millions of years. But we see the infinite plane of facts and we impose a moral interpretation on it. And the moral interpretation is what to do about what is.
So good. It's about the goal. Fully agreed with Jordan Peterson so far. So a problem here. One objection that religious people make is, well, what is well-being? Who gets to define well-being? Some of us believe that consent is the bedrock of well-being, and others believe that it's objectively good things for the human condition, like longer lifespan and health and having plenty to eat and so on and so forth. So this raises a political question. That's what that is. Consent versus other types of well-being. Or I could just say consent versus well-being, right? On the one hand, you have an Ayn Rand, Mad Max dystopia. On the other end, you have like a Kim Jong-un sort of a situation where, if Big Brother knows best, they can squash all the consent. This is one reason politics and law were invented, is to answer this question. So if evolution is a drive for personal well-being, and we're pursuing personal well-being in a context of other people, well, you only need to care about your in-group, right? Because that's all you need to do to guarantee personal well-being. So the objection goes, what is wrong with Nazis or white supremacy, and so on and so forth? That's a very interesting question. So, just like there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a hierarchy of morality, too, that I would like to propose. And it looks a little something like this. At the bottom, you've got your basic needs. All the things that you seek, shelter and food. And up a little ways, you get a little bit more enlightened. You start realizing that it's not just about material wealth and material security. Do people like you? Because if people don't like you, you're not going to have a very good time as a human being. There's no oxytocin being produced. If people like you, you're surrounded by reciprocal love and respect. And that's a much better way to live. And at the top of the list, we have a desire for the best possible world. This also comes from selfishness, because the best possible world is the best possible world for everyone. And that includes you. So, did the Nazis work toward the best possible world? Of course they didn't. The best possible world is the best possible world for everyone. A quick interjected addendum here. How is it that I know that the best possible world is the best possible world for everybody? Isn't it possible that the best possible world could include one without, say, Jews? What if getting rid of all the Jews would create a better world for everybody? If it's just a matter of opinion, who's to say that Hitler was wrong? The best possible world from organisms' point of view is a world with the minimum amount of suffering possible. You would have to create a lot of suffering to get rid of the Jews to find out whether or not you'd have a better world without them. It's sort of like saying you'd have a better life if you cut off your pinky. The only way to find out for sure is to cut off your pinky. And you might end up being wrong. And you'd have created a lot of suffering along the way as you hack at it. So how are you going to prove that you'd have a better life if you hacked off your pinky? The only way you could do it is to hack off your pinky. And how are you going to prove that you'd have a better world without Jews? You'd have to create a lot of suffering in order to find out. So this argument, one objection I can think of is that, well, you are denying the possibility of revolutions then. So how are you going to find out if you'd have a better country if you overthrew the monarchy than you would under the monarchy? Well, revolutions are political matters. So this is in a different realm. We're talking about a political question. There has to be some level of consent in a government in order for that government to be valid and not resisted. And what that minimum level of consent is an interesting sociological question, but it is a sociological question. It's not the same thing as creating tons of suffering, irrespective of how much consent there is in a government. Now, how do we get to this desire for the best possible world? That also comes through a more enlightened selfishness. So here goes Peterson again.
And then, well, what happens if you don't treat other people like they matter? Well, you lie to them, you cheat them, you steal, you enter into impulsive relationships with them. They can't trust you. That doesn't go anywhere. They don't like you. You end up alone at best and maybe like incarcerated at worst. Like that doesn't work. And so you watch the people around you who thrive, regardless of what they say. They act out the proposition that everyone matters. And then you have a functional society. And I think, okay, well, if when you act out the proposition that everyone matters, you have a functional society, maybe that's evidence that that proposition is true.
Now he says, if acting like everyone matters leads to a productive society, then maybe the proposition is true. I disagree here. And it's because of the proposition he's talking about. What is the proposition? He's talking about the proposition that everyone matters equally. Well, let's make an analogy to a bookshelf. So, if you treat books as if they belong on a bookshelf, then you'll have a functional library. That doesn't mean that books belong on a bookshelf is a true thing. It means that with respect to the goal of having a functional library, putting books on a bookshelf is the right move.
What you should do isn't the same as what is. But you need to know. You need to know how not to suffer, and you need to know what your aim is. And so you have to overlay that objective reality with some interpretive structure.
So this is not a matter of ontological truth, in other words. It's a matter of working toward a specific goal that you have in mind. Benjamin Franklin liked to say, to educate a man in mind but not morals is to educate a menace to society. I disagree. Morality makes sense. If you know what the best thing is for you, then you'll work toward that, and it is a matter of rationality. So I propose that to educate a man in mind is to educate him in morals. Here's another problem. What if we don't care what we're designed to care about? You're missing a piece. You don't want to be collaborative. Is there anything wrong with someone who doesn't have any remorse, thinks it's a good thing to go out and rape or murder whoever he feels like raping or murdering? This gets back to the hierarchy of morality. Number one, if they don't, they can just go on to jail. That's why we created laws and these systems, is to separate those kind of people from us. We're not having a conversation about morality with somebody who doesn't have the same inclinations as us and the same desires. They're lacking that component. Therefore, we separate them from us so that the 99.9% of us can get back to creating collaborative interdependence. And number two, well, we can try to convince them. We can try to convince them that serving their basest needs and desires is not the best way to achieve maximum fulfillment. I think that should be pretty easy to do unless they're purely psychotic and they truly are missing a piece. In which case, that's why we made those jails and mental institutions and things like that. So Peterson tries to solve this problem this way.
It's like, I think it's true. I think the idea that the individual has a spark of divinity within him or her, I think there isn't a more true way of saying that.
Spark of divinity. What is that? I don't know what divinity is, and I don't know what a spark of divinity is. He said you can't say it any better than that. I think he did say it better than that already. He said if treating everyone as if they matters leads to a more functional society, ... Take off the if. Treating everyone as if they matter leads to a functional society. That's it. That is the proposition that he should be talking about, and that is true. And if you are operating by superimposing a moral framework on top of an ontological reality, like he's talking about doing, that's it. That's all you need to do. He's trying to establish a sacrosanct ideal here, and he doesn't think you can do that unless you appeal to the mystical. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is say, well, this is axiomatically true. It can be demonstrated. Treating everyone as if they matters leads to a more functional society. So a third objection to this is, well, what if you can get away with doing the bad stuff without incurring jail or negative social consequences? Everyone will still think you're a good person, but, you know, the cameras are off, so go ahead and snatch that muffin or that necklace or whatever off the shelf, put it in your pocket, and everything will be fine. Well, this one's a little bit more tricky, and I want to be very careful here as I describe this. So, first off, from a selfishness level of the hierarchy of morality, mental health is sort of the argument here. It's bad for your mental health to incur the stress that comes with doing bad things in the dark. It's bad for your mental health to create imposter syndrome in yourself when everybody thinks you're a good person, but deep down you know you're kind of shady. And it's bad for your mental health to go through life without a clear conscience. Now, is this good enough? Well, it's not good enough to guarantee that people will behave well, because people aren't always rational. And that's why I say to educate a man in mind is to educate him in morals. But failing that, of course, we do have jail, and so on and so forth. The problem here is that religious people think we can't have a sacrosanct ideal as unbelievers without these divine carrots and sticks. And I think that's troubling. They think that if there were no carrots and sticks like that, we could just go out raping and murdering willy-nilly as we desire. Now, if that's the only thing keeping them from raping and murdering, there's something wrong. And I think this is why the religious mode of morality is inferior. It isn't always, of course. A lot of religious people don't do it for the reward or to avoid hell. They do it out of love. That's possible. But the ones that ask, why wouldn't we go raping and murdering if there's no sticks and carrots, show me that this is a barbaric level of moral reasoning. You can't figure out why it's bad to go raping and murdering, even absent jail? You don't care if people like you? You don't care if people detest you? And without eternal value, well, you might as well fulfill your base pleasures and, deal with the hatred and the detesting and stuff. Why? Just because Mozart's 40th Symphony has an end, it doesn't mean it didn't mean anything. As a matter of fact, when you take away eternal value, that's when things get more valuable, subjectively speaking. Because if the only thing that's valuing anything is you, that means that's the only value there is. Why would it be just as good to eat sawdust as a delicious feast? Just because you're going to die one day. Really? It's better to eat a delicious feast than it is to eat sawdust. And it's better to listen to Mozart. Well, this is subjective, but I think it's better to listen to Mozart than it is to listen to Nickelback. Why would you fill the limited space that you have with nonsense when you could be filling it with something good? If that's all there is. Carpe diem? Anybody? Hello? It's the Bible that says in Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanity. All is vanities. Everything will come to nothing. You'll end up in the same ground. That's the Bible saying that. That's not existentialists or atheists saying that. That's the Bible. So in our world, this is a doctrine of action, of optimism, of making the most of the limited time that we have and filling it with good rather than evil. Let's not eat sawdust, folks. Let's feast.